Hey, I'm Joel Rissinger. Thank you for joining me here on our Communicate to Lead blog. I want to talk to you today about surprise, surprise communication. I've had 25 years as a professional communicator, a lot of different roles, but always that one common theme, whether it was in business, in sales and marketing, writing advertisements or junk mail, direct mail, or as a salesperson making presentations with slides and grease boards, or as a pastor speaking every week publicly, writing for newsletters and other publications, or as an author, writing now 3 books and for other magazines and publications over the years. The common thread has been communicating. And what I've learned is that to lead, you have to communicate. What I've also learned is that there are certain key principles about communication that really make us more successful. I've learned this the hard way. I can't say I've always done it right, but when I have, I see the difference, and thus my current role. You know, my plan, position, desire, hope, dream is to help leaders in the church as well as leaders in the business community to communicate in ways that lead and influence people for good. So I want to give you today 3 key principles for being a leader who communicates well. And I hope that these will be valuable to you and helpful. And I'd love to hear from you as to what the results were and whether or not you've seen this to be true in your own life, or whether or not you have implemented some of these things and maybe have some feedback for us. That would be awesome. First principle is, when in doubt, communicate. I think a lot of times people that maybe have grown up with certain cultural distinctives or emphasis, or maybe been in certain business cultures where we only say what we need to. It's on a need-to-know basis, and we're very closed-mouthed and guarded and protective of all the information that we have. And listen, I'm not talking about spilling company secrets or anything of that sort, but I do think that if I were to characterize what I've witnessed in the business world and in the religious world as well, it would be the biggest problem is a failure to communicate. I don't know if you remember the movie Cool Hand Luke. Some of you might remember that movie. Yeah, the famous line from the movie was, I believe, spoken by initially by the warden of the prison, where several inmates served, and it's kind of a chain gang. And I don't want to ruin the movie. Go get it. You'll love it. I'm sure you can find it at Netflix or someplace. But the famous line spoken, I believe, by the warden and later by one of the key characters in the film was, "What we have here is a failure to communicate." And that was his excuse then to take away privileges or beat the prisoners or do something violent, typically. I would say that's true in most organizations. What we have here is a failure to communicate. Yes, you can over-communicate. Yes, you can say too much. I get it. But if you're going to err on the side of too much as opposed to not enough information. You can always edit and change. You can always redirect and clarify. But if you say nothing, you let people's imaginations run wild, both internally and externally, and that typically produces more harm than good. And so, again, my experience is, when in doubt, communicate. Say something. Try to share and clarify, and try to work with folks and use various media. And that's the second point, really, second key, I think, to good communication is the fact that you use multiple media, multiple venues to get your message out. A lot of times people think, well, I said it in a meeting, that should be sufficient. Or we sent an inter-office memo, or we sent an email. Now, when people get so much email, junk mail, I love these multi-page emails that people send. I've seen companies do this, and it's just, oh my gosh, it's just painful to read through it. And if you're on a smartphone, I have my smartphone with me today, and you're trying to scroll through these multiple pages, and you're just like, please. And the problem with that is, and again, I'm not saying to avoid any of those. I'm actually saying the opposite. Use them all. Because if you have one venue, and for a certain portion of your audience, that venue is unavailable or unattractive, you're gonna miss them. If you send an email to your sales force and they don't read email, then you're gonna miss the entire sales force, or at least a good portion of them. Or they'll get part of the message, they'll skim it, and then forget the rest. I always say communicate using multiple venues. Do it and do it well and do it often, because that way you're pretty much assured to catch everybody with something, and some people you'll catch more than once, and so what? So if they get the same message more than once, is that a bad thing? And that really leads me to my third key for effective communication, and that is that you need to say it simply and you need to say it repeatedly. Simply and repeatedly. You see, a lot of times we think that the more complex our presentation, the more seriously people will take it. If it sounds intellectual, if it sounds mind-boggling, then we think that somehow our sales team or our church staff or our volunteers or the people in the engineering department are going to take it seriously. Now, I said engineering, maybe they would take it seriously, but used a lot of technical terminology. Although I've known a lot of design engineers in the software world when I was selling system software, for example, in their own communication back and forth with each other, they did not use 25-cent words or 50-cent words, unless you're talking about 4-letter words, which they don't cost that much. No, I'm joking, but they weren't interested, and most people aren't interested in being impressed by what you write and communicate. They want to be informed by what you write and communicate. Again, maybe attorneys are an exception. There might be a few. But for the most part, that's not how people function. Keep it simple, right? Keep it simple, and you'll find that you reach more people. I was hired at Applied Data Research originally, not in sales, although that's where I ended up. I was actually hired to write for the marketing department because, ready for this? I didn't know what software was. I'm telling the truth. When I first interviewed, I went to the interview, and I told a friend of mine who worked for Sprint at the time. He's a computer techie. I said, his name was Jeff. I said, Jeff, I'm going for an interview with a software company tomorrow. He said, oh, that's great. I said, one question. He said, sure. I said, what's software? I said, hardware's like hammers and nails, right? So what's software then? He said, you're kidding me. You're going for an interview tomorrow, and you don't know what software is. I said, that's right. He said, oh boy, you're in trouble. Well, as it turned out, that was actually a selling point. They wanted me because I didn't know what the stuff was or how it worked. Because what they were looking for is someone who could listen to the developers and then communicate to customers and salespeople in a way that they could understand. Yeah, so my job was to make sure that the complicated was presented in a simple way. That people who weren't programmers and software gurus could understand what the product was and what it did for them. And a funny story, I was talking to one of the developers one day, and he was trying to explain this particular feature of this one software package we had. And he kept explaining it to me, and I'd ask him another question. And he'd explain it, I'd ask him another question. And he'd explain it, I'd say, I don't get it. I mean, you got to put it in different terms. He finally got really angry, and he said, listen, if you buy our packages without this feature, you don't have, and I'll just paraphrase him, pooey. And I said, that's it. Now I got the message. He said, you do? I said, yeah, I can explain that. If you buy a package and you don't have this feature, it's useless. I said, that's something people would understand. That's something they can relate to. Now they want to pay attention. And this is what I did. See, I took the complicated and I made it simple. And that's a huge key. But it's not just keep it simple, it's also say it often. You know, as a father, if I wanted my daughter home when she was dating, she's now married with kids, but when she was dating, when she was a teenager, if I wanted her home by 11 o'clock on a Friday night, I had to be very specific about that and keep it very simple, but I also had to repeat it. I didn't just say it Friday afternoon once, you know, as she was trying to do her homework. No. I said it multiple times during the week. I said it Friday afternoon. I said it Friday evening. When her date picked her up at the door, I said it to her and him at the same time. And I was very specific about 11 means 11:00, not 11:01. In-house, door shut. We know you're home and safe by 11. Or earlier is even better. And I was very clear, but I said it multiple times. Well, if that's true of me as a weak human father with great limitation, how much more so is it with leaders who communicate how much more important is it for leaders who communicate that we keep it simple and we say it often? So when in doubt, communicate, right? And I mean, even if you overdo it or you get it wrong, you can always fix it. But it's better to do that than to remain silent and let people's imagination or worries or doubts or questions about your product or service or about your message, go awry and be misunderstood. So I think that's clear. Use multiple forms. Write, use email, use verbal communication, use video, use every means possible. Text message, use all the social media, but also thirdly, keep it simple as well as saying it repeatedly so that it's remembered and useful. Hopefully these things will make a difference for you as they have for me, as I've been blessed to make six-figure income when I was 28 years old, some 30 plus years ago, selling software, or when I was doing business consulting as a recruiter, or as a pastor, as I've led 3 churches through major transitions, a couple of mergers, and even started a new church in our living room, which has since ministered to hundreds of people. In all those venues and all those circumstances, communication has been the key, and those 3 elements, the 3 elements I shared today, have been a major part of that. Hope that blesses you. Hope that helps you. Again, we'd love to hear from you, so send us a note as to your experience, and we'd love to help out any way we can. Have a great day.